This is Citizen True Crime Podcast. The citizen investigator is breaking the true crime genre. Instead of following the real detectives, this series follows the stories of real, everyday people from all walks of life, who for unique reasons are motivated to solve the most mysterious, captivating criminal cases in the world. Citizen True Crime Podcast will include exclusive access, crowdsourcing, and interviews with subjects, victims, family members, and experts on each case. Here is Citizen True Crime Podcast, Season 1. This is the Zodiac speaking, the Zodiac Killer case. This production is dedicated to the victims and their families. We pray that one day there will be closure for them. To understand the Zodiac Killer case, one needs to understand the time and place of which he existed. We begin on December 20th, 2018, on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California, on the 50th anniversary of the first Zodiac Killer slayings. Citizen investigators still want answers. It's daytime. They have gathered to honor the victims. Tom Voigt, who started following the case 30 years ago and created ZodiacKiller.com, stands at the scene of Zodiac's first attack.
Exactly 50 years ago, right now, this was just nothing. This was just a gravel turnout. But that night, it became, an infamous crime scene. This is a crime scene that people come here from all around the world to see this gravel turnout. There have been people here from Japan, there have been people come here from Europe to see this patch of gravel. And it's because of what happened 50 years ago. The Zodiac wasn't called that yet, but he found some victims right here parked in a car and drove away, and now we're still trying to figure out who he is.
Last in Line Pictures presents Citizen True Crime Podcast. Sound design and music by Frank Coppola. And this is the voice of Tom Voigt.
San Francisco was terrorized in the late 1960s and the early 1970s by a man who called himself the Zodiac Killer. He claimed 37 murders. The Zodiac Killer case has been unsolved for over 50 years. And many people think they know the case, but they couldn't be further from the truth. I've dedicated the last 20 years of my life to solving this case, and no, I'm not a cop. I'm a citizen investigator. I'm Tom Voigt. I'm a web designer by day, but in my free time, I run ZodiacKiller.com, a website devoted to solving the Zodiac Killer mystery. I am obsessed with this case. It's America's most infamous cold case.
A typical investigator wants to know, what did the suspect look like at the relevant time? Did he match any of the descriptions of the killer? What's his background? What's his education? To everyone involved, except for people reading true crime books, Zodiac was unsolvable. So it's best to just not waste time on it. And of course, amateur detectives, don't have to punch the clock and so forth.
And this is Angie, Tom's girlfriend.
So I met Tom in 2004, first via email and through his message board and website, and had always been obsessed with the case myself because I read the book and lived very close to one of the crime scenes. And used to fish at Lake Berryessa when I was a little kid with my grandpa. He was never caught, and he, the codes and the fact that he killed people in isolated spots and places I had been personally before I realized that that's where they happened. And that just seemed really scary, like he could still be out there.
Trying to get as much attention as possible to this case so it would get solved. It's almost a home away from home, these crime scenes, because we find ourselves back at them even when we weren't going to. I've gotten threats since I launched my Zodiac website. All sorts of delusional people, all sorts of kooks are kind of flocked to the site. One in particular is threatening to kill people who are here at this crime scene. According to him, he's going to kill people that show up here on the 50th anniversary, which is today. I'm standing where it used to be a crime scene. There was a young teenage couple named David and Betty, and they were on their first official date, even though they'd been seeing each other in secret. he killed the male, shot him in the head as David was exiting the vehicle. Betty, when she heard the gunshot or saw it, she started running that way, and Zodiac shot her 5 times in the back. The male victim was found next to it with the door open, and the female victim was found right over here. I thought maybe it would be a good idea to, instead of this place being known for something that's, really horrible, I thought it might be a good idea to
What are you doing? What are you doing?
So now it'll be known as something positive and good. What do you think? Would you marry me?
Yes.
Okay.
God, what are you doing?
She said yes. Did you get that? She said, yeah, I know. Maybe he's still alive, but I don't care if he's dead or not. I don't care if he gets prosecuted. I just want to know who he was, and then the case is solved and we can move on.
Later that night, the citizen investigators gather at the crime scene in the dark. There is a police cruiser parked at the location, providing security.
A group of people here on the 50th anniversary are gathered out here to remember the victims and to share information. Hopefully one day someone will share the right information and the Zodiac will be brought to justice. If you're parked here, you're vulnerable for sure. And the victims were parked here and obviously were vulnerable. That was exactly now 50 years ago to the minute. I first came out here at the 30th anniversary, 20 years ago tonight, and nothing's changed. This area is still exactly the same. I mean, the trees, nothing's different. And it was this way 50 years ago. The area is just, it's like going back in time. The other crime scenes have changed, but this one hasn't. So I think that's why people come here, is because it's so much like it was at the time. The spot had its own name. It was called Gate 13. I guess it was named after this gate over here. And so people who wanted to head here for whatever reason, they knew where to find it by name. And mostly teenagers used it. And the other side of the gate, if you go down the road there, it's a shooting range, a police shooting range. I don't know if the Zodiac knew that, but if he did, then it would be a good way to taunt the police, is to take 2 victims right here outside the shooting range by gun.
This is the voice of retired Benicia police officer Tom Dalby.
We all just want to say their names quickly. David Faraday.
David Faraday.
And Betty Lou Jensen.
Betty Lou Jensen.
And, rest in peace, and we're still thinking of you. And there's a lot of people who aren't here who are also thinking of you. Question of, who did it? Are they still here? Are they still among us? And I mean, my own personal feeling is that they are.
Yeah, my name is Wolfgang Keil. I'm an immigrant from Germany. I immigrated into the Bay Area about 20 years ago, at which point I became aware of the Zodiac Killer case. The case, initially, I was a little bit curious about it. You look a little bit deeper, it becomes a very, very strange case. The deeper you look into this case, the more curious it becomes. One of the aspects of the Zodiac case is the fact that the killer has started to communicate with the media, and as part of his communication with the media and the police, law enforcement, he's been sending various ciphers. And that is, of course, something that's very intriguing. Very few killers have, or criminal and people have done this. And you look at the ciphers and you really want to know what's in them. That's, the first cipher was cracked relatively fast, and every other cipher after that has never been cracked. So far, no attempts have been successful. There are several attempts out there by other people, but they are only very partial. And if you look very close, you'll find the fact that those are not real, true, valid solutions. Well, this is the 50th anniversary of the case, and that started the murder spree that happened thereafter. And the intriguing fact about that is that nobody really until today understands really what happened back then. This was a murder. This was a couple was shot, another couple got shot, but the murders that followed that don't follow the same pattern anymore. So one might say, okay, this killer has had a motive. He killed couples. But then he goes to San Francisco, kills a cab driver. So that doesn't fit anymore. And then he starts communicating with the police and with law enforcement, with the media. And you start wondering, what is his motive? Nobody so far has understood what this guy was after. And that's where the case becomes very interesting, because you can't put it to rest. You don't, normally, you for a killing, you understand, okay, he had this one motive. But for this guy, it is different. Every angle you look at this case from turns out to be, you have a theory here, but it then contradicts another thing that he did then later. And I think that is the reason why many people can't put this case to rest. We haven't caught the guy, and we never understood what he was up to.
Trying to get the Zodiac caught. I want him caught, and I believe that he's still alive. I do not believe that he died. I don't believe it was Arthur Lee Allen. The man that I got away from was smaller. He was more like 5'9", stocky, curly brown hair, glasses, talks in a monotone voice. My name is Sandy Betts, and I'm one of the people that posts on ZodiacKiller.com. I've been with Tom for like 20 years, posting on his site, and I wanted to do something that hasn't been done before, and this is such a big deal, the 50th anniversary. I was a cocktail waitress in Vallejo in the late 60s. I worked several of the clubs here, and one night I left one club to go to another to pick up a paycheck that they owed me. And it was getting close to 2 o'clock when I got there. And I saw some guys that I knew from Richmond, and they asked me to sit down and have a drink with them. Well, I sat down, talked to them for about maybe 10 minutes, picked up my check, and they, thank goodness, walked me out to my car. Well, when I went out to the car, I turned the key, and all of a sudden, nothing. I said to the boys, I said, would you guys mind looking underneath my hood to see if my coil wire is okay? And they looked, they said, what are you, psychic? Your coil wire is gone. So they took one out of somebody else's car that was parked there, put it in my car, and I start driving home, and I get the feeling I'm being followed. And I was. I was a waitress down in Oakland, and he walked up behind me, and he scared me, and I screamed. And he looked at me, and he goes, I am very sorry if I frightened you. And I mean, I knew I was standing toe-to-toe with the Zodiac Killer. I'm very, very sure of it.
Sandy Betts reported her information to the Vallejo police in June of 1970. Next is the story of Richard Gakowski.
One of the most, probably, I would say, scrutinized victim of the Zodiac was a girl named Darlene Farron. Actually, she was 22 years old or so. And it's been thought for ever since she was killed 50 years ago that she might have known the Zodiac. And so her entire personal life was just kind of, well, for 5 decades, it's been scrutinized and turned upside down. And one of the Zodiac suspects that apparently did know Darlene was named Richard Gakowski. And I learned about him shortly after I launched ZodiacKiller.com in 1998. I was approached by one of Darlene's sisters, and she had information about Gakowski that she wanted to share with me, and I didn't find him compelling at all. He was way down on my list. Pam, Darlene's sister, had a really grainy photograph that, in my opinion, didn't look that much like the Zodiac Killer, and she had a lot of information that she had been given by an informant named Blaine, who used to know Richard back in the 1960s, and the information was all over the map, and I just couldn't find anything that really compelled me.
Here's an interview with David Morris, longtime Zodiac case researcher.
I started working with Tom on the website after being a user and a reader for quite some time. Around 2007, Blaine contacted me because he had read my posts and seen me on the site, and he said he had a great suspect. And I called up Tom and asked him, what do you think about Richard Gakowski? And he said, oh, that's from Purple Blaine. He's come and gone. It's nothing important. And I said, well, there's some things in there that are getting kind of lost in the shuffle, but I said, I think it's pretty interesting. So Blaine had amassed over years recordings that he had made of Gakowski's voice, newspaper clippings, photographs. Some of the stuff was intriguing. Some of the stuff was actually, potentially more than just passing fancy. So the more that we dug into it, the more interesting it seemed. Everything sort of built on itself. The further that we looked into his passports and whatnot, and into his life and his job, it all sort of came piece by piece together. The fact that Gakowski worked at a newspaper, a counterculture newspaper, was something that was very intriguing, because Zodiac had never been associated with actually working in the press. And as it continued, we kept finding other overlapping things. The Good Times newspaper where he worked had quotes and content and pictures and things that seemed to be referencing Zodiac letters and Zodiac, activity and contact.
All of a sudden, some really interesting information came to light, and it didn't take long, and Richard became my top priority. So Pam was, by that point, really impressed with Blaine's information, and she eventually, knocked on Richard's door and was brought in. She asked for handwriting samples from Richard that she could compare to the Zodiac's handwriting. And the handwriting samples were very interesting. Richard was a really intelligent guy, but he would misspell words, really easy words. He would misspell, just like the Zodiac. The Zodiac misspelled easy words. So the similarities were there, and Pam left, that encounter, believing that Richard could be the Zodiac. And so kind of her support helped Blaine get taken seriously by the Department of Justice in California. They wanted Richard's handwriting samples to compare to the Zodiac's handwriting. And Blaine turned over everything he had. And the Department of Justice concluded that Richard Gakowski could have been the Zodiac based on handwriting. So they asked Blaine to get more handwriting samples, and Blaine had given them all, that he could. And by that time, Richard knew he was under investigation. So he was not handwriting anything anymore. And that's where it pretty much ended. So based on handwriting, Gakowski definitely could have been the Zodiac Killer. And there aren't that many people that fall into that category. Gakowski eventually was talked to the FBI. They knocked on his door and said, somebody thinks you're the Zodiac Killer. Richard claimed that he had a passport that would prove that he was out of the country during all the Zodiac stuff, and but that he could not find the passport. Well, that turned out to be a lie. He was not out of the country during the Zodiac crimes. Eventually, his passport records were retrieved, and he was definitely not in, he was here. And so that was interesting. At the time, the FBI had no way to prove whether he was telling the truth or not. But in retrospect, now it's easy to get any record you want on the internet. You can find whatever you want. It takes a matter of hours at the most. You can get somebody's entire history. Early in the morning of July 5th, 1969, after shooting a young couple, the Zodiac went to a payphone in Vallejo, California, and called the police to report his crime. And he spoke to a police dispatcher named Nancy Slover, who became one of my really good friends and great sources of information. And so over the years, I would play Nancy audio of various Zodiac suspects to see if maybe she might recognize their voice as being the person she talked to on the phone early that morning. And when I played her Richard Gakowski's voice, she had a violent physical reaction and ended up having to go into therapy because it brought back just all these memories that she hadn't experienced for so long.
Hi everybody, it's Nancy again. I'm back. I listened to the voice of Richard. I felt shocked and deja vu. In my opinion, he was the same person who I listened to in July of 1969, or twin.
Here's a recording of Richard Gakowski.
The whole thing about a code, you got to remember also, once until a code is broken, you have never any way of knowing whether it's a real code or whether it's just a fake code. What's that mean? Well, it just means that sometimes, like the military and all of that, sometimes you would send garbled messages that meant absolutely nothing, so that you get the enemy to spend all their time trying to break the code.
Well, after all this time, I still feel like he is the best suspect that has come and gone. It's difficult to plant your flag and say, oh, this is it and this is unchanging, because we're amateur investigators. We have to look at what information we have. Does the FBI have a whole bunch of information that we're not aware of and that would turn the tide? We don't know. But as we find things and other people find things, and there's a lot of people contributing and working and investigating on the sites online, he still intrigues me. He's still, the fact that he's so involved with writing and newspapers, and that he uses newspaper slang, don't bury me in the back pages, and things like that, which you wouldn't normally get in the vocabulary of somebody that doesn't have anything to do with newspapers or journalism.
On the next episode of Citizen True Crime Podcast, this is the Zodiac speaking. We follow the citizen investigators to the next Zodiac Killer crime scene, Blue Rock Springs in Vallejo, California.
Like 3 miles or so as the crow flies in this direction was the next event that eventually all became connected. And that was just after midnight on July 5th was the subsequent attack to this one. And it was a similar situation, a young couple in a car, guy uses a gun and gets away with it. But he stepped it up. He made a phone call and reported his own crime. So that didn't happen here, but it happened in the next one. And then the escalation continued and the risk-taking continued. And
for Last in Line Pictures, I'm Trey Borzillieri, and this is Citizen True Crime Podcast. For additional content from this episode, visit the Last in Line Pictures YouTube channel. Search at Last in Line Pictures.